Welcome. I want you to prepare yourself for a highly methodical, exhaustive examination of a case file that spans decades, crosses international borders, and fundamentally challenges the structural integrity of the modern justice system. We are embarking on a comprehensive exploration of a voluminous compilation of research files, historical records, and dense judicial documents. The mission for this extensive examination is to chronologically and factually unpack an international, multi-decade criminal investigation and the unprecedented legal battle that followed in its wake. This is a sequence of events that begins with a birth in Paris in 1957 and extends all the way through a relentless progression of legal maneuvers, intense media scrutiny, and deeply entrenched judicial stalemates up to the present era in the 2020s. Specifically, we are examining the unsolved 1996 murder of a prominent French television producer in a remote, highly isolated rural area of Ireland. Over the course of this analysis, you will hear the precise details regarding the subsequent law enforcement investigations. You will hear about the severe and historically unprecedented international legal clashes between the Sovereign Republic of Ireland and the French Republic. And you will see the massive, pervasive footprint this case has left behind across global media networks. We will look at the timelines, the specific witness testimonies, the anomalies, and the physical evidence, and the legal documentation exactly as they exist in the official records. We will follow the data wherever it leads.
Analytically speaking, the documentation of this case presents a highly significant study in procedural friction. When you observe the collected data objectively, it fundamentally highlights the severe complications that inevitably arise between differing national justice systems. Specifically, it tests the extreme limits of extraterritorial jurisdiction. Furthermore, the records we are examining provide a clinical demonstration of the systemic complications associated with circumstantial evidence. It illustrates the physical degradation of crime scenes over time, and it highlights the quantifiable unreliability of shifting witness testimonies when they are subjected to the stress of several decades.
Right. And to understand the sheer magnitude of this international incident, you must first understand the background of the victim. We cannot look at the culmination of the event without establishing the baseline. So we will begin strictly with her biography, as recorded in the documentation. The victim was born Sophie Bugnol on the 28th of July, 1957, in Paris, France. As she progressed through her professional life, she established herself as a highly successful television producer within the highly competitive French media industry. Her life in Paris was established, documented, and by all accounts, highly structured. In 1991, she married Sophie Toscan du Plantier, further cementing her position within the French cultural sphere, and she had a son from a previous marriage. Her professional and personal life in France was secure and successful. However, the records indicate that she maintained a distinct geographical tie to a completely different environment, one that stands in stark contrast to the bustling center of Paris. This geographical connection is the central anchor to the events that ultimately unfolded.
The geographical context is essential for a factual, objective understanding of the timeline. The historical records indicate that she had visited Ireland on several occasions during her teenage years. This early exposure formed a documented psychological and geographical connection to the region. Consequently, this historical familiarity culminated in a significant property transaction. In 1993, she purchased a rural cottage in Ireland to serve as a private holiday retreat away from her life in France.
Exactly. And I want to meticulously describe the location of this property for you, because the physical isolation of the environment is a critical defining factor in the subsequent investigation and the challenges faced by law enforcement. The cottage she purchased is located in the townland of Dunmanus West. This is situated near Toormore, Goleen, in the deeply rural area of West Cork, Ireland. I want you to picture the landscape based on the geographical surveys and police descriptions. This is not a densely populated suburb. It is a rugged, harsh, and isolated landscape exposed to the elements of the Atlantic coast. The properties are spread far apart, often separated by winding, narrow country roads and thick physical barriers. It is also worth noting, for the sake of the local historical record, that the residents of this remote area primarily knew her by her maiden name, Sophie Bugnol, rather than her married name, Toscan du Plantier. Establishing the precise timeline leading up to the event is our next priority. According to international travel records and local witness accounts, she arrived in Ireland, traveling entirely alone, on the 20th of December, 1996. Her documented intention, according to communications with her family, was to spend a brief solitary period at her holiday retreat before returning to Paris in time to observe the Christmas holiday with her family.
The forensic timeline commences exactly 3 days after her documented arrival in the country. The initiation of this timeline is recorded as the morning of the 23rd of December, 1996.
I'm going to provide you with a lengthy and highly detailed account of the events of that specific morning, relying strictly on the initial investigative records and the statements of the first responders. At precisely 10:00 a.m. on the 23rd of December, a neighbor who was moving through the area made a discovery in a laneway located beside the victim's house. It was the body of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. The specific documented details of the scene as recorded by the initial responders are highly unusual, and they must be stated exactly as they appear in the file. The victim was discovered clad in her nightwear, but inexplicably, she was also wearing boots. This incongruity in attire immediately suggested a sudden, unexpected departure from the interior of the house. Furthermore, the records indicate that her long john bottoms were caught on a barbed wire fence near the perimeter of the property, indicating a physical struggle or a desperate attempt to navigate the rugged boundary of the land. The scene itself presented multiple areas of interest regarding physical evidence. Bloodstains were documented as being present on a nearby gate situated in the laneway. Additionally, bloodstains were found on a piece of slate and on a concrete block, both situated in the immediate vicinity of the body. These physical objects became the focal point of the immediate forensic assessment.
Observing this sequence from a clinical perspective, the forensic timeline contains a highly anomalous procedural deviation that permanently impacted the data collection. The physical body of the victim was left outdoors, exposed to the harsh, freezing environmental elements of rural Ireland in late December, for a duration of 28 hours before the arrival of the state pathologist, Dr. John Harbison. This extended exposure introduces profound compounding variables into the post-mortem data collection, significantly complicating the determination of the exact time of death and the preservation of trace evidence.
Yes, that 28-hour delay is a massive factor. And when Dr. Harbison did finally arrive and conduct his examination, his pathological findings were extensively documented in the official file. The pathologist recorded trauma of an extreme nature. The official findings listed a laceration and swelling of the brain, a fractured skull, and multiple blunt head injuries. To really grasp why the initial response faced immediate complications, you have to consider the severity of the trauma as recorded in the documentation. The facial injuries sustained by the victim were so extreme, so completely devastating, that the neighbor who initially discovered the body in the laneway was entirely unable to formally identify her. The visual identification protocols were rendered useless. The formal identification had to be established through other procedural means due to the catastrophic extent of the blunt force trauma.
Following the initial discovery and the subsequent pathological assessment, the operational focus shifts entirely to the immediate law enforcement response initiated by the Garda Síochána, the National Police Service of Ireland. The data surrounding their evidence collection processes, chain of custody protocols, and scene management has been subject to extensive, formal review over the intervening decades.
We must now carefully detail the specific criticisms regarding the mishandling of physical evidence by the Gardaí, as these criticisms form a massive foundational portion of the historical record and the subsequent legal appeals. Several crucial items collected from the immediate crime scene were recorded as having gone missing while in secure police custody. The most prominent and heavily scrutinized example is the blood-stained gate that was documented near the body in the laneway. To understand the gravity of this, you have to realize that a blood-stained gate isn't just an object. It is a physical anchor of the crime scene that could hold crucial spatter patterns or transfer evidence. This gate simply vanished from the official evidence logs. The Gardaí later mounted a formal defense regarding this specific piece of missing evidence. Their official recorded claim was that the gate had been disposed of intentionally, citing a lack of evidentiary value. You can imagine how this specific explanation factored into the subsequent international legal battles, given the clinical fact that bloodstains directly associated with a violent crime scene were present on the object when it was initially documented.
The objective facts regarding the police conduct and the management of the physical evidence were later formally assessed by an independent oversight body. A comprehensive report was generated by the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, commonly referred to in the records as GSOC. The GSOC report concluded that there was no evidentiary proof of high-level systemic corruption within the force regarding the specific directives of this investigation. However, the report did confirm a severe, pervasive lack of basic administration and management. Most notably, from a clinical and procedural standpoint, the report documented that investigative records had been physically altered and several pages had been entirely removed from the physical files. It is noted in the data, however, that these physical alterations took place a considerable amount of time after the initial active investigation phase had concluded.
Adding significantly to the complexity of the investigative record are the numerous formal allegations made by civilian witnesses, as well as by the individual who would eventually become the prime suspect. These allegations formally accuse the police of utilizing aggressive coercion and intimidation tactics during their interrogations and evidence-gathering procedures. This narrative of alleged police misconduct gained a massive new layer of documentation many years later. In 2014, it was publicly revealed that telephone calls at various Garda stations across the country had been secretly recorded. This included the abandoned Garda station, which served as the central operational hub for this specific murder investigation. This public revelation led directly to the establishment of the Fennelly Commission, a formal inquiry tasked with investigating the contents and implications of these secret recordings. The commission was severely limited in its scope, as it had to rely solely on the 297 recorded calls that physically survived. It is documented in the administrative logs that many other recordings from that specific station were permanently lost due to flooding in the storage facility.
The Fennelly Commission's conclusions must be stated strictly on the facts presented in their final published report. Upon reviewing the surviving audio data, they determined there was evidence indicating that police personnel were prepared to contemplate altering or suppressing evidence that the prime suspect had not committed the crime. However, the Commission explicitly noted an absence of definitive proof within the recordings that the officers actually executed those alterations. The Commission did, however, definitively find that Garda improperly and unlawfully disclosed confidential, sensitive information regarding the ongoing, active investigation to civilian journalists.
This systematic disclosure of information and the shifting focus of the investigation brings us directly to the individual who became the focal point of the entire Garda operation. We must introduce the prime suspect in the files, Ian Kenneth Bailey. You need to understand his background exactly as it is laid out in the official police profiles. Bailey was born on the 27th of January 1957 in Manchester, England. His professional and personal background was highly varied, transient, and eclectic. He worked primarily as a freelance journalist, and the publication records show he sometimes published his written work under the alias Ian Bailey. Beyond his journalistic endeavors, his employment history in the records included working manual labor in a fish processing factory and operating a local market stall where he sold a highly unusual combination of pizzas and his own original poetry. The timeline of his geographical movements places his arrival in Ireland, starting in the year 1991. By 1992, the records show he was living with his partner, Catherine Thomas, who was known locally within the community as Jules Thomas. They resided together in the area of Goleen, a location which placed him geographically in very close physical proximity to the victim's holiday home in Dumanis West.
A thorough review of Bailey's behavioral history, specifically the data points known to the local police prior to the 1996 murder, reveals specific patterns. There were previous, officially documented incidents of domestic violence directed toward his partner. The medical and police records indicate these incidents were severe enough to result in her physical hospitalization. Furthermore, the judicial records show that several years later, in 2001, he received a formal conviction for assault in the Skibbereen District Court. To provide further analytical context during the later judicial proceedings in the French courts, a comprehensive psychiatric report was prepared. This psychiatric assessment concluded that he possessed a personality constructed on narcissism, psychorigidity, violence, impulsiveness, and egocentricity. The report further noted a clinical intolerance to frustration, a great need for recognition, and a documented, observable tendency to become violent under the liberating effects of alcohol consumption.
I am now going to detail the highly unusual, heavily scrutinized circumstances surrounding Bailey's own journalistic coverage of the crime, as the exact timeline of his knowledge of the murder is a central, load-bearing pillar of the investigative files. Bailey formally claimed to the authorities that he was first informed of the murder at exactly 1:40 p.m. on the 23rd of December by a reporter calling from the Examiner newspaper. However, when you look closely at the investigative records, they contain formal statements from several separate witnesses that directly and fundamentally contradict this timeline. Multiple witnesses stated on the formal record that Bailey had spoken to them directly about the murder of a French woman before noon on that very same day. Furthermore, the files contain statements from 3 separate witnesses indicating that Bailey had approached them and offered to sell them crime scene photographs at approximately 11:00 a.m. This massive discrepancy in the timeline between his official claim and witness statements became a massive point of contention for the investigators. Additionally, while the police investigation was actively ongoing in the region, Bailey continued to write, pitch, and publish news articles about the case. In these published articles, he consistently and deliberately steered suspicion away from the local West Cork area and directed it internationally toward France. He published specific allegations stating that the victim had multiple male companions, clearly suggesting that the motive and the perpetrator originated from her complex life in Paris rather than her immediate local environment in rural Ireland. Throughout all of this media activity and police questioning, Bailey continuously and vehemently denied having any prior knowledge of the victim or ever having met her. However, this foundational claim was also directly contradicted by several witness statements in the police files, which asserted under formal questioning that he did, in fact, know her prior to the murder.
Moving from the behavioral and timeline discrepancies to the physical evidence directly associated with the suspect, investigators documented specific, observable physical anomalies on Bailey's body in the days immediately following the discovery of the crime. The official observational logs noted multiple scratch marks located on his forearms, as well as a distinct visible injury to his forehead.
When confronted with these observations, Bailey provided a specific explanation for these injuries to the investigating authorities. He claimed on the record that he sustained the scratches on his forearms and the injury to his head while cutting down a Christmas tree on his own property on the morning of the 22nd of December, which was the day exactly prior to the victim's body being discovered in the laneway.
The investigative response to this specific physical claim was strictly empirical. Investigators attempted a physical reconstruction. They attempted to reproduce similar injury patterns by cutting down trees of the exact same type in the exact same manner described by the suspect, and they failed to produce corresponding scratch patterns on the forearms. Additionally, the investigators collected witness testimonies from individuals who spent time interacting with Bailey on the evening of the 22nd of December, a time frame that falls chronologically after the alleged tree-cutting incident, but before the estimated time of the murder. These witnesses formally stated that they did not observe any injuries on his forehead or his forearms during their interactions with him that evening.
You must also look closely at the alibis provided by Bailey and his partner for the specific night of the murder, as the formal records show a highly complex series of conflicting and constantly changing timelines. To understand how the circumstantial case was built, let us break down the exact versions of events given to the police. Version 1. In their initial formal statements to the Garda, both Bailey and his partner presented a unified front, stating that Bailey was in bed with her all night long without any interruption whatsoever. Version 2. Sometime later in the investigation, his partner formally retracted her initial signed account. She provided a completely new statement to the authorities, saying that Bailey actually left the bed approximately an hour after they had gone to sleep at 10 p.m. In this revised statement, she noted he did not return to the bed until 9 a.m. the next morning, and crucially, when he did return, she noted the presence of a new visible injury on his forehead. Version 3. Following his partner's formal retraction, Bailey himself changed his official story to the police. He presented a third distinct timeline, claiming that he got out of bed at 4 a.m., spent approximately 30 minutes writing an article, and then returned to bed. These shifting, contradictory narratives provided by the prime suspect and his partner became a cornerstone of the circumstantial case assembled against him by the authorities.
Beyond the anomalies in the physical evidence and the documented discrepancies in the timeline, the investigative files contain highly specific testimonies regarding alleged verbal confessions. Analytically, it is necessary to present these specific allegations purely as they are documented in the records, evaluating them as data points within the broader circumstantial matrix.
I will detail these alleged verbal confessions for you exactly as the provided records dictate. The first notable testimony entered into the record comes from a woman named Amanda Reed. In 2019, she provided formal testimony stating that decades earlier, back in February of 1997, Bailey has spoken directly to her 14-year-old son. According to Reed's sworn testimony, Bailey told the young boy that he smashed her brains in with a rock. It must be noted on the record that Bailey completely and officially disputed that this event or this conversation ever occurred. The second notable declaration in the files occurred in 2003, provided by individuals named Richie and Rosie Thomas. They submitted a formal declaration to the authorities claiming that in 1998, while they were drinking at home with Bailey following a night out, the topic of the unsolved killing arose in conversation. They claimed in their declaration that Bailey stated to them explicitly, I did it, I went too far." As with the previous allegation from Amanda Reed, Bailey vehemently and completely disputed this claim, maintaining his absolute innocence and denying the conversation took place.
The structural integrity of the potential prosecution's case in Ireland also heavily relied on the testimony of a specific individual designated in the files as the key witness. The chronological data shows that on the 11th of January 1997, a woman residing in the town of Shull initiated contact with the Gardaí. She placed a call from a public payphone and deliberately utilized an alias to mask her identity. The substantive core of her report was that she had observed a man standing on Keelfata Bridge at 3 a.m. on the specific night the murder occurred.
The progression of this specific witness's involvement is a highly convoluted sequence of events that requires very careful examination, as it demonstrates the fragility of witness testimony over time. Following her anonymous phone call, the police made a public television appeal, urgently urging the unknown caller to come forward and provide a formal, signed statement. The woman subsequently called the police station from her private home residence. During this call, she stated explicitly that she refused to come forward publicly. However, the authorities successfully traced this phone call to her residence, which led directly to her formal identification by the police. When questioned by investigators about her extreme reluctance to testify, she provided a highly specific explanation. She explained that on the night in question, when she drove past the bridge, she was driving in a car with a man who was not her husband. She stated she was entirely unwilling to testify publicly because doing so would expose this private association to her community and her family. Years later, while under oath during a judicial proceeding, she finally identified the man in the car with her as a deceased individual originally from Longford.
The documented history of her testimony exhibits significant fundamental variance over the subsequent timeline. In a 2003 libel trial, she provided sworn evidence supporting the newspapers, officially identifying the man she observed on the bridge that night as Ian Bailey. The subsequent chronological data shows an immediate escalation in conflict regarding her participation. In 2004, Bailey initiated formal legal action, threatening her with a lawsuit if she did not immediately retract her sworn statements. The following year, in the 2005 record, she filed a formal police report alleging that Bailey had physically intimidated her inside her local shop.
The absolute climax of this key witness's changing narrative occurred a full decade later. In 2015, during a civil case in which Ian Bailey was suing the state for wrongful arrest, this exact same key witness took the stand and provided evidence directly on behalf of Bailey. In this stunning testimony, she entirely contradicted her earlier sworn statements, formally retracting her identification of him on the bridge. Because she provided two completely opposing, irreconcilable accounts under oath in a court of law, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, formally requested a transcript of her 2015 testimony. Their stated objective was to examine her statements for the specific crime of perjury.
The complete collapse of the primary witness testimonies, combined with the entirely circumstantial nature of the physical evidence collected in Ireland, forces a transition in the analytical focus from the domestic to the international legal sphere. To comprehend the mechanics of the next phase of this chronological record, you must understand a specific underlying legal principle. Under the statutes of French law, the state claims the right of extraterritorial jurisdiction. Analytically, this means the French legal system asserts the sovereign authority to investigate, formally charge, and prosecute the murder of a French citizen, regardless of where in the world that specific crime was committed.
This specific principle of French law set the stage for an intense, unprecedented legal battle between two allied sovereign nations. We will detail the victims' families' actions first, as they were the primary catalyst for this international escalation. The family, deeply frustrated by the complete lack of a criminal trial in the Republic of Ireland, mobilized their resources within the French legal system. In 2007, they officially founded the Association for the Truth on the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier née Bugnot. Their stated documented goal was to aggressively advance the investigation and force a prosecution utilizing French legal mechanisms. This organization's efforts led directly to a relentless series of international extradition attempts. Let us outline these attempts chronologically to understand the scale of the judicial stalemate. In February of 2010, a French magistrate formally issued a European arrest warrant for Ian Bailey. The Irish High Court, reviewing the warrant, initially granted this extradition order. However, Bailey's legal team immediately appealed this decision to the highest court in the land, the Irish Supreme Court. In March of 2012, the Supreme Court issued its definitive ruling. All 5 judges on the panel unanimously upheld Bailey's appeal, effectively blocking the extradition to France. Their legal reasoning was based on the fact that France did not actually intend to put him on trial at that specific stage. The French authorities only wanted to secure him for further questioning. Furthermore, 4 of the 5 judges noted a critical, fundamental jurisdictional issue. The offense occurred entirely outside French territory. They cited a specific lack of reciprocity between the Irish and French legal statutes regarding this highly specific type of extraterritorial jurisdiction. In essence, the Irish courts ruled they could not hand over a resident for a crime committed in Ireland to be tried in France.
The procedural timeline of this legal conflict continues into the year 2016. The official records show that Bailey authored a formal letter directed to the Irish Director of Public Prosecutions. In this correspondence, he explicitly requested to be put on trial within the Republic of Ireland. He stated his objective was to clear his name in a domestic court, submitting himself to the Irish judicial process. This formal request was entirely ignored by the authorities. Subsequently, in 2017, the French authorities issued a second European arrest warrant. This action resulted in Bailey's physical arrest within Ireland, but navigating the established legal precedents, he once again successfully avoided extradition.
Because the French state could not physically secure Bailey's presence within their borders due to the rulings of the Irish Supreme Court, they utilized a specific provision in their own legal code to proceed without him. This brings us directly to the 2019 French trial. Bailey was tried in absentia, which translates to a trial held in his physical absence by the Cour d'Assises in Paris. The proceedings took place without the defendant. On May 31, 2019, the French court formally convicted Ian Bailey of the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. They subsequently sentenced him to 25 years in a French prison.
The reaction from the Irish legal defense apparatus was immediate and highly critical of the jurisdictional overlap and the nature of the proceedings. Frank Buttimer, who served as Bailey's Irish solicitor, provided a formal public statement characterizing the proceedings in Paris specifically as a show trial. He argued from a legal standpoint that the French judicial action fundamentally undermined the authority and sovereignty of the Irish courts. His recorded statement asserted, "We are a democratic country," and he expressed the view that France demonstrated absolutely no respect for Ireland's sovereign justice system by proceeding with a murder conviction based on circumstantial evidence that the Irish DPP had repeatedly and formally deemed insufficient to warrant a trial.
We must now conclude the narrative of this massive international legal battle. The final, definitive legal ruling occurred on October 12, 2020. Judge Paul Burns, presiding in the Irish High Court, issued a strict ruling that Ian Bailey absolutely could not be extradited to France under any circumstances. He based his ruling firmly and exclusively on Section 44 of the European Arrest Warrant Act. This specific section expressly prohibits surrendering an individual if the alleged offense was committed in a place other than the issuing state. Following this definitive High Court ruling, the Irish state made the formal decision not to appeal the finding. This administrative decision effectively and permanently ended all formal, legal attempts to extradite Ian Bailey to France. It is a matter of record, however, that the diplomatic friction between the two nations remained palpable. During a state visit to Dublin in August of 2021, French President Emmanuel Macron publicly suggested to the press that a new trial could potentially be arranged in France if Bailey were to voluntarily travel to French territory. Bailey, unsurprisingly, entirely declined to do so, remaining within the borders of Ireland.
Moving into the contemporary era, the analytical focus shifts from the courtroom to the cultural and procedural aftermath of this impenetrable judicial stalemate. The sheer volume of media generated by this specific case is statistically remarkable within the genre of factual crime reporting and cultural documentation.
I'm going to list the extensive catalog of media that this case has generated because the massive cultural footprint is a defining characteristic of this story's modern existence. When the formal courts fail to provide a definitive resolution or an agreed-upon truth, documentary makers, journalists, and authors step directly into the void. In 2018, the details of the case reached a massive, unprecedented global audience through the West Cork podcast miniseries. Prior to that global explosion, in 2017, the Irish national broadcaster Arte produced an intensive hour-long documentary titled The Du Plantier Case. In 2021, the visual media footprint expanded exponentially. Renowned filmmaker Jim Sheridan produced and directed a highly detailed 5-part series for Sky Crime titled Murder at the Cottage: The Search for Justice for Sophie. In that exact same year, the streaming service Netflix released its own multi-part documentary series titled Sophie: A Murder in West Cork. Beyond the visual media, you also have an extensive growing library of literature completely dedicated to analyzing the files and the history of the case. There are detailed books authored by Michael Sheridan, a book by Ralph Riegel, and a book by Nick Foster. The literary output surrounding these files continues to this very day, with the year 2024 seeing the publication of 2 brand new books, The Blow-In by G.M. Comiskey and Sophie, The Final Verdict by Sandra Maloney. There are also formal reports of an upcoming docudrama currently titled Recreation, which is reportedly inspired by the classic film format of 12 Angry Men. The volume of content generated from this singular, isolated event in 1996 is absolutely staggering.
Concurrently with the massive media expansion, there were updates within the official state-run investigative apparatus. In June of 2022, the Garda Serious Crime Review Team issued a formal public announcement stating they would conduct a full review of the murder case. The stated objective was to completely re-examine the historical evidence using contemporary analytical methods and updated forensic technologies.
But the narrative of the prime suspect reached its definitive physical end before that police review could yield any public results or new charges. We must cover the final days of Ian Bailey exactly as they are recorded in the contemporary files. On January 21, 2024, Ian Bailey collapsed on a street outside his residence in the town of Bantry. He died shortly thereafter at the age of 66. The official medical cause of death was recorded as a suspected cardiac arrest.
The procedural actions taken by the state following his death were immediate. In January of 2024, within mere days of his passing, Garda executed a formal, legally authorized search warrant on his flat in West Cork. The evidence logs indicate that during the search, they physically seized a laptop, memory sticks, various personal notebooks, and items specifically intended to generate a definitive DNA profile for comparative analysis against the historical crime scene data.
To bring our extensive timeline completely up to date, we must look at the most recent events occurring in late 2024 and early 2025. Following the publication of Sinan Maloney's book in late 2024, the Taoiseach of Ireland, Michael Martin, made a highly unusual, heavily scrutinized public statement regarding the historical handling of the case. He stated on the public record that Ireland didn't do right by Sophie Toscan du Plantier and her family, openly acknowledging the systemic failures of the state's apparatus over the past 3 decades. And the legal conflicts surrounding the immense media footprint are still actively generating new court files. In January of 2025, Bailey's former partner, Jules Thomas, made a formal public announcement regarding her own legal actions. She stated her explicit intention to sue the streaming service Netflix and the production company Lightbox Media. Her lawsuit formally alleged unauthorized filming and the deliberate fabrication of material within their 2021 documentary series. The collateral legal battles continue to generate new records, new filings, and new headlines, even after the death of the primary suspect. I want you to deeply consider the profound and unsettling implications of this decades-long saga. When the physical evidence of a crime scene is mismanaged, altered, or completely lost in the critical first hours, and when 2 allied democratic nations possess fundamentally conflicting legal doctrines regarding the limits of global jurisdiction, where can the objective truth actually be firmly established? You must ponder how the massive explosion of modern media consumption, with its endless documentaries, books, and interpretations, affects the public understanding of a case when the formal, established justice system reaches a complete and impenetrable stalemate. Thanks for listening.